Hello, and welcome to our Bible study on the Ten Commandments, where in each lesson we're going to discuss a different commandment. We're going to have a key word that's going to help focus and guide our discussion, to help give clarity to that commandment, and then some points to think about as we live our daily lives. Our commandment today is the second commandment. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. And our guide word for today is nonchalant. When we think about the commandment where it says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, a lot of people say, well, that it means that you shouldn't use blasphemy, or you shouldn't be irreverent in the way that you talk about God. And all of those things are absolutely positively true. But the hard issue with the second commandment and misusing the name of God is the times in which we are nonchalant and we just casually throw the name of God into our conversations. What it means is that the more we use the name of God as a casual part of our conversation, the more prone to misusing it we are. That it can turn into something that is irreverent, that it can turn into something that is blasphemous. But ultimately, what we don't want to have happen when we think about using the name of God is that people are disaffected by it. And when we're nonchalant and when we're just casual about the way that we use the name of God in our casual conversations, the more opportunity that people are going to tune us out when we're trying to say something good or something very specific about who God is and what He has done for us. And so here's a couple of points to think about as we think through the second commandment. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Names have meaning. Names have meaning. And if you go back into the Old Testament, and all of the names of the people in the Old Testament had some type of meaning. And a lot of the names of the people of the Old Testament, when they would make names for people in the Old Testament, a lot of them would get connected to the name of God Himself. I am God, or I follow God. And there would be all of these different names that had an attribution thinking about the way in which God has affected them or has affected their family. When God came to Moses and Moses said, "Who should I tell the Israelites has sent me?" God said, "Tell them that I am has sent you." And He says, "I am who I am." God's name is meant to be spoken amongst the people. And when God invokes His name or asks us to invoke His name, it's meant to be a point of remembrance for us so that we understand that God continues to be with us and will help us through everything. And so the Israelites were encouraged when they spoke the name of God to remind themselves that God was always with them and was going to watch over and care for them. Names have meaning, and the name of God has a specific meaning. He is who He is. He has existed, He is existing, and He always will exist. And He will always be with His people just like He always has been. And that is what we want people to remember when they speak the name of God. And point number 2, God's name should invoke a response every time we speak it. God's name should invoke a response every time we speak it. Now, God's name should invoke either a positive or a negative response. For some people, it's going to be a negative response because they understand that God is calling them to maybe put off something or maybe stop in a particular habit that they've been in, and it causes a little bit of wrestling in their heart. But ultimately, that wrestling, we hope and pray, will lead them to pursue God a little bit more, to pursue and to read through His commands and to read through the Bible and to see what the Bible has to say for them. And ultimately, it'll lead them to understanding that Jesus is a good and gracious God. And He forgives us of the sins and the things that we do. And that when we think of Him, we are liberated from our sinfulness. And we have the opportunity, when God's name is spoken, it doesn't any longer invoke a negative response, but invokes a positive response that we want to celebrate, not just ourselves, but with other people as well. And point number 3, exclamations are perhaps our biggest stumbling blocks. Have you ever noticed that when people say exclamations out loud, a lot of times there happens to be the name of God in those exclamations? And sometimes those exclamations are great, and you can see that they are full of faith when people say them. But a lot of times, exclamations just make their way into our casual conversations. This goes back to being nonchalant about it. And our exclamations are just another phrase or another word that we use in our vocabulary. And the more that we use it, and the more that God's name or something about God that is connected to it, it loses its significance. I think if you go back and you look at a lot of the explanations that are out there, you will see, or you can trace back, that they somehow have something to do with either the name of God itself or some attribute of God, or something that is kind of inherently a part of the relationship between us and God. For example, if you go back 500 years into Scotland, the word wow. If you ever wondered where the exclamation wow comes from, we have the first kind of examples of it about 500 years ago in Scottish literature. And scholars have gone back and have looked at the way that wow, and taken the progression all the way back, and they believe that it goes back to the Scottish word vow, and that means, or it's a shortened way of saying from Scotland, I vow, or I swear, which ultimately is going to lead us to thinking about how we relate to God. And so exclamations, we have to be very careful with the way that we use them in our language, because we can use them incorrectly, and it can go to the misuse of God's name and the way in which we want to proclaim who God is. So I hope these few points in this time has helped you understand and given you some things to think about the second commandment.